Broadcast live to over 20 million Americans, Speaker Mike Johnson didn't just interrupt Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, he humiliated her with a vicious personal attack in the heart of a federal hearing. Less than 24 hours later, Jasmine dropped a $100 million lawsuit that shook the foundations of power in Washington. This wasn't politics. It was a war for respect, identity, and survival. What happens when the most powerful man in Congress humiliates the wrong woman? On live TV? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the blinding congressional lights, the federal budget hearing kicked off live. Over 20 million Americans watching. Mike Johnson stood tall, flashing a rehearsed smile. "This," he declared, holding up a leather-bound folder, "is the one big beautiful bill. It cuts welfare bloat, slashes Medicaid by 32%, and ends federal rent subsidies. This is how we save America from entitlement addiction." His voice was smooth, his confidence near arrogant. A few Republican allies clapped. Cameras zoomed in. Jasmine Crockett stood up without waiting. Her tone was calm, but her eyes burned. "This bill isn't beautiful. It's a loaded gun aimed at America's poorest families. Cutting health care, housing, and food assistance isn't budgeting. It's bloodletting." Gas rippled through the chamber. Johnson's smile twisted. "Instead of emotional outbursts," he cut in sharply, "why don't you learn how to read a budget first?" The room froze. His words hung heavy. Jasmine didn't blink. The battle line was drawn. The war had begun. Jasmine didn't blink at Johnson's jab. Instead, she reached for the remote beside her mic, because this time, she brought receipts. The screen behind her flickered to life, and a bar graph filled the room. "According to KFF," she began, voice steady but razor sharp, "over 190,000 people in Louisiana will lose Medicaid under your so-called beautiful bill." A new slide clicked up. Parish by parish data, red zones everywhere. That's not reform. That's abandonment. That's 190,000 lives, cut off because this chamber values optics over oxygen. The room grew still, screens glowing against frozen faces. Jasmine stepped forward. "These aren't statistics. These are your voters, Mr. Johnson. Your neighbors." Johnson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Then he laughed. Short, sharp, cruel. "Louisiana doesn't need leeches," he said coldly. "We don't need to feed people who won't stand on their own 2 feet." Gas shot through the room. One congresswoman from New Orleans dropped her pen. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her hand tightened on the clicker. Without a word, the next slide appeared. A photo. A little boy with hollow eyes and a breathing tube. Then another. An elderly black woman gripping a Medicaid denial letter with both hands. "His name is Malik," Jasmine said. 6 years old. Stage 3 leukemia. His treatment depends on the program you're slashing. And that woman, she worked 40 years as a bus driver in Baton Rouge. Under your plan, she loses everything." She turned back to Johnson. "These aren't leeches, they're survivors." Johnson interrupted again, voice rising with impatience. "We need a budget, not a sob story. Congress isn't a therapy session." Some Republicans nodded. He smirked. "Let's not confuse guilt with governance." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Her voice dropped half a pitch, but hit twice as hard. "You're cutting off their legs and then blaming them for not running fast enough." Murmurs erupted. "You're stealing air and telling them to breathe." Her hands slammed the table. "And when we show you the faces of those you're hurting, you call them weak, but they're stronger than the bill you just shoved in front of this country." From the Democratic side, a wave of outrage exploded. "Shame on you! You call that leadership? Don't you dare!" One congresswoman shouted. "How dare you call our kids parasites?" Another slammed her hand on the desk. The chair pounded the gavel, yelling for order, but the chaos surged louder. Jasmine stood still. Johnson looked rattled for the first time. The chamber wasn't just tense, it was boiling. And for a flash of 5 seconds, the most powerful room in the country belonged to the voices it had tried to silence. The room was still trembling from Jasmine's last line, but Mike Johnson wasn't backing down. He was about to make it personal. Johnson leaned into his mic, voice sharp and slow, every word aimed like a dagger. "Let's stop pretending," he began. Congresswoman Crockett isn't here to legislate. She's a reality show in a suit, fake lashes, fake outrage, and a brand built on drama, not substance. Audible gasps shot through the chamber. Someone whispered, "Did he just say that?" Staffers froze. The insult wasn't subtle. It was an attack. Johnson's smirk said he knew exactly what he was doing. "She's not debating policy," he added. "She's auditioning for Twitter clips and podcast invites." His tone dripped with contempt. "And we're supposed to take that seriously?" His words hung heavy in the air. A few Republicans chuckled nervously. Others stayed quiet, sensing a line was being crossed. From the Democratic side, the reaction came swift and tense. A congresswoman snapped her pen in half. Another lawmaker clenched his jaw, whispering under his breath, "That's disgusting." His eyes never left Johnson. The anger wasn't at Jasmine. It was for the venom being thrown at her. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't move. She stared directly at Johnson, silent, composed. Her hands rested calmly on her binder. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was coiled steel. Johnson, misreading her stillness as weakness, went in again. "Oh, I get it," he sneered. "You think staying quiet makes you brave. You think scowling makes you Rosa Parks?" The air was sucked from the room. "Let's be clear. This is Congress, not a civil rights cosplay." That detonated the chamber. Shocked voices burst from the Democratic side. "Unacceptable!" someone shouted. "How dare you!" cried another. A female representative stood up, fury in her voice. "You don't get to invoke Rosa Parks while tearing down black women." The chair slammed the gavel. "Order! Order!" he shouted. But the fury didn't stop. Still, Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. She slowly flipped open her binder. Steady hands, locked gaze, zero reaction. Her stillness now read differently. Not restraint, not fear. It was calculation, precision. She was letting him dig his own hole, and he just had. Jasmine's silence didn't shake, but it did something worse. It unnerved Johnson, and what he did next would change everything. Slamming his hand on the desk, Mike Johnson leaned into the mic with raw frustration. His voice cracked through the chamber like a whip. "I don't have time for this nonsense," he barked. "If you're not qualified to speak like an adult, then get out." The words hit like gunfire. His voice, sharp and angry, echoed into every corner of the room and across 20 million screens watching live. The chamber froze. You could hear someone drop a pen. A staffer near the rear gasped audibly. Lawmakers on both sides stiffened in their seats, stunned. What he said wasn't just loud, it was loaded. A white male speaker screaming at a black woman to get out and calling her not qualified wasn't just politics. It was a flashpoint, a powder keg. A phrase laced with decades of buried racism and misogyny had just been thrown under the fluorescent lights of the nation's capital. Cameras zoomed in. Jasmine Crockett stood slowly, her chair creaking behind her. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She stood tall, chin slightly raised, hands resting gently on the folder in front of her. 1 second passed, then another, and another. 6 seconds of dead silence. 6 seconds that stretched like a steel cable pulled to its breaking point. Then, without a word, she placed a thick binder on the table with a firm thud. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You're not humiliating me," she said, her tone low and clear. "You're humiliating millions of Americans who live with the policies you treat like theater props." She didn't look away. "You want to scream? Fine. But don't pretend you're above the people you just erased with your mouth." Every syllable dropped like a stone into water. The chamber erupted. Some lawmakers stood and clapped. Others shouted over them. "Out of line," yelled a Republican voice. "That was racist," came a cry from the left. The gavel slammed repeatedly. "Order! Order!" the chair demanded, but no one was listening. Journalists in the gallery scrambled to capture the moment. A camera light flashed across Jasmine's face, still calm, still defiant. Her binder remained on the table like a declaration of war. Mike Johnson's face had gone pale. He leaned back, expression hard to read. Was it anger, regret, or fear? No one knew yet. But the chamber knew one thing. Something had cracked. This wasn't just a policy debate anymore. It wasn't even personal. It was national. And every viewer, every lawmaker, every journalist could feel it. The room had split. One side stood, hands red from applause. The other sat frozen, like watching something they never thought would happen. Jasmine Crockett had not just defended herself, she had reframed the fight. And Johnson, in trying to silence her, had just handed her the loudest mic in the building, and she hadn't even raised her voice. The Capitol had barely caught its breath. But by morning, Jasmine Crockett flipped the script, from target to plaintiff. At exactly 8:02 a.m., the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. received the filing. Crockett versus Johnson. The headline roared through every newsroom in America. $100 million lawsuit. Defamation in broad daylight. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't anonymous sourcing. It was real and it was bold. Jasmine Crockett had sued the sitting Speaker of the House for humiliating her on live national television. And this time, it wasn't just a headline. It was history in motion. The lawsuit laid it out with surgical clarity. Johnson had used his podium not to legislate, but to deliberately defame and humiliate a member of Congress on the basis of race, gender, and personal identity. It cited the exact language, the exact timestamp, and the 20 million live viewers who witnessed it. Damages? $25 million for direct political and personal harm. Another $75 million as punitive punishment to remind those in power that public microphones are not weapons. By midday, Johnson stood outside the Capitol, a wall of reporters aiming mics like rifles. His tie was tight, but his voice was tighter. "I only spoke the truth," he snapped. "Don't turn politics into emotional theater." He turned and walked off. No questions, no apology. Just defiance wrapped in a suit. But truth had already split wide open, and it was looped on every screen in America. Networks stitched together clips from C-SPAN, CNN, FOX, even cell phones and live streams. The infamous moment wasn't just being replayed, it was being dissected. Frame by frame, the country watched Mike Johnson's face distort. The rage, the vein pulsing at his temple, the moment he slammed the desk. And then the scream, "Get out if you're not qualified." News anchors called it unhinged. Civil rights groups called it calculated humiliation. But what truly broke the narrative was the tone. His voice no longer measured, but snarling. And the target? A black woman standing in silence. The optics weren't just bad. They were radioactive. Commentators from both sides chimed in. "You can't spin that footage," one legal analyst said. "You can't Photoshop the fury." Across social media, side-by-side reaction videos flooded in. One clip showed Jasmine's 6 seconds of silence next to Johnson's red-faced eruption. Caption, "One of them lost control, the other took control." And just like that, the lawsuit stopped being paperwork. It became a national reckoning, because it wasn't about feelings. It was about force. Not just the words that were said, but who said them, how he said them, and why it finally cost him. As the lawsuit sent shockwaves through the country, the aftershocks hit hardest inside the Capitol itself, where political loyalties were suddenly put to the test. Behind closed doors, the Republican Party was unraveling. Some members rushed to Johnson's defense, calling the lawsuit a political stunt and insisting the Speaker simply lost his temper. But not everyone followed. Several GOP senators refused interviews altogether. A few aides were caught whispering to reporters in Capitol corridors, admitting the outburst looked bad on tape. One Republican strategist reportedly told his team, "We didn't sign up to defend televised meltdowns." Others tried to deflect. "This is about free speech," one representative insisted on Fox News. "Let's not pretend Crockett was some innocent bystander." But even that narrative wobbled. The footage was too clear, the audio too sharp, the silence that followed too deafening. And with every replay of Johnson's outburst, more Republicans quietly stepped back. Across the aisle, things moved fast. By that afternoon, Democratic leadership had called an emergency caucus meeting. The room was tense, the energy electric. Lawmakers pored over transcripts, video stills, legal briefings. The goal wasn't just to react, it was to respond with force. Within 2 hours, a formal proposal hit the table, an ethics investigation into Mike Johnson for conduct unbecoming of the Speaker of the House. AOC was the first to speak. She stood without notes, voice calm but scorching. If any other woman in this chamber had been yelled at like that, on camera, on government time, we'd be talking about resignation. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. She continued, "It doesn't matter if she's black, brown, or from the Bronx. What matters is that she was silenced by a man with power and a mic." Cori Bush followed, her tone heavier, eyes locked on the press clippings in her hand. "We are not props. We are not here to absorb humiliation and call it debate." That outburst wasn't just about policy. That was about erasure. The room nodded. You could feel the mood shift from outrage to resolve. Then came Pramila Jayapal, fierce and unflinching. "If we don't act, we endorse it. If we let it slide, we normalize it." She paused, then added the line that would be quoted on headlines that night. "Women were not born to be silent." The room froze for a beat. Then applause erupted. Short, sharp, defiant. Cameras weren't allowed in the caucus chamber, but leaks move fast. Within minutes, that final quote lit up every political feed in Washington. Reporters outside began connecting the dots. Johnson's blow-up, the defamation suit, and now the push for an ethics review. The message was clear. This wasn't just a PR disaster. It was a full-blown reckoning. And the women in Congress were done waiting their turn. After days of headlines, outrage, and mounting pressure from both sides of the aisle, the real battle moved to where there were no microphones to hide behind. Only testimony, truth, and judgment. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was surrounded by press vans and barricades before sunrise. By noon, more than 15 million Americans were watching the live broadcast as the doors to courtroom 3A opened. Inside, the air was heavy, even through the screen. This wasn't political theater anymore. This was real. Mike Johnson entered first, flanked by a wall of attorneys in navy suits. His face was tight, expression unreadable but far from relaxed. He didn't look like a speaker. He looked like a man bracing for impact. The cameras caught the moment he sat, posture stiff, jaw clenched, his hands clenched beneath the table. Then came Jasmine Crockett. She entered alone, no entourage, no dramatics, just a black suit, a steady walk, and a 200-page binder clutched firmly to her chest. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She simply took her seat at the plaintiff's table, eyes forward, a nation watching, and she hadn't said a word. When the judge entered, the room rose. The cameras pulled wide as the gavel struck. "This is not a political trial," the judge declared, looking straight ahead. His voice was firm, grounded, final. "This is a trial about human dignity." The weight of that sentence settled over everyone in the room, and every viewer glued to the screen. Then the camera panned slowly to the jury box. 12 citizens sat still, listening. 8 were women, 4 were people of color. Their expressions were solemn, their eyes sharp. No one smiled. No one moved. They had been selected not just for balance, but for truth. They were America in miniature, diverse, observant, and now responsible for deciding whether one voice had been weaponized against another in front of the entire nation. The stage was set. One binder, one courtroom, 2 reputations, and 12 people about to decide what dignity looks like, under oath, on camera, and in history. The lead attorney for Jasmine Crockett stood and walked to the center of the courtroom, holding a small silver remote in his hand. His tone was measured, but his eyes never left the jury. "Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to present a short clip from a personal recording captured on the day in question." The judge nodded. The screen behind the witness stand lit up. The audio started with low background chatter, shuffling papers, creaking chairs. Then came the voice, crystal clear, unmistakable. "You're just a joke in a dress and propaganda skin." Mike Johnson's voice snapped through the speakers. "I'll make sure you disappear from this town in 6 months." The entire courtroom froze. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward in their chairs. Johnson sat motionless at the defense table, color draining from his face. His jaw clenched, but his eyes flickered, not with anger, but panic. On the jury bench, a woman in her 50s covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes welled with tears. She didn't wipe them. She just stared ahead, breathing heavily. One of the male jurors looked down, his fingers tightening around his pen. The judge said nothing. No one did. The silence in that courtroom was heavier than any gavel. Jasmine didn't react. She stayed completely still, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. She had already lived through those words once. She didn't need to flinch now. Then Johnson's lead counsel stood abruptly. "Objection," he said sharply. "Lacks context. That statement was not part of any official proceeding and falls under legislative immunity." The judge raised a brow. "Legislative immunity doesn't apply to off-mic threats. Continue." Jasmine's attorney didn't blink. "We anticipated that response," he said. Then he held up a flash drive. "We have the full 13-minute recording, time-stamped, unedited, clearly showing this was said after the microphones were off and the session had ended. Right as Mr. Johnson passed Congresswoman Crockett's desk, he inserted the drive into the court system. The screen filled with the waveform of the extended audio. Time codes ran along the bottom. At 10 minutes and 57 seconds, the microphone clearly picks up Johnson's voice. Lower, private, but unmistakably his. If she thinks that stunt today earned her anything, she's dumber than I thought. We're going to bleed her dry on camera. Make her look like an unstable clown every time she opens her mouth." Then at 11 minutes and 32 seconds, he adds coldly, "You watch. 6 months from now, she'll be gone. Career over, wiped clean. She won't even see it coming." The courtroom turned to ice, but they weren't finished. The attorney clicked to the next slide. It was an email, subject line bold and unmistakable. "Strategy, undermine Jasmine Crockett, target public image." Gasps returned like thunder. The email had been sent 2 days before the hearing by one of Johnson's top media advisors. Beneath the subject line was a bullet-pointed list. Mock appearance, push narrative of overreaction, paint as unstable and unfit. The jury stared at the screen. One juror leaned forward, visibly stunned. Another scribbled something rapidly on her notepad. Johnson sat frozen. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but he didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the screen, watching his own plan burn in real time. And Jasmine? She hadn't said a word. She didn't have to. The evidence spoke louder than anything else in the room, and this time Johnson couldn't yell over it. He couldn't cut her off. He was the one being heard now, exactly as he was. The room was already reeling from the audio and email, but Jasmine's team wasn't finished. Now it was time to put Johnson on the stand and pin him down. The courtroom fell quiet as Jasmine's lead attorney stepped forward for cross-examination. The tension was sharp enough to cut through steel. Mike Johnson took the witness chair, adjusting his suit as if it could somehow protect him. The attorney's tone was calm, but his words landed like punches. "Mr. Johnson," he began, "have you ever referred to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett as a dangerous media figure?" Johnson blinked. His lips parted, but no words came at first. Then, "I don't recall using that specific phrasing." The attorney didn't flinch. He took one slow step forward. "So that's not a denial?" Look, in political strategy, we often talk in general terms. Let me rephrase," the attorney interrupted. "Did you ever give an instruction to get her off camera as fast as possible?" Johnson shifted in his seat. "That could have been someone else paraphrasing me, not something I explicitly ordered." The attorney leaned in slightly. "So you're saying it's possible you gave that order, but you just don't remember?" Johnson tried to smile. "In the chaos of campaigns, things get said." The jury exchanged glances. One juror scribbled rapidly. Another folded his arms. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Please answer directly, Mr. Johnson." There was a pause, then Johnson said, "I may have made suggestions about media optics. That's not defamation. That's strategy." The attorney stepped back, let the silence sit, and then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this witness is being evasive." The judge banged the gavel once. "You will answer clearly. No deflection. This is a federal courtroom, not a press conference." Flustered, Johnson huffed. "Criticizing someone's behavior or tone isn't defamation. Criticizing emotion is not defamation." The courtroom tensed. The judge leaned forward slowly, voice like stone. "We're not here to judge emotion," he said. We are here to judge consequence. The air shifted. Then Jasmine Crockett herself stood from the plaintiff's table, calmly, with purpose. She reached into her binder and pulled out a slim black USB. This, her attorney announced, holding it up, contains a private video call between Mr. Johnson and his senior advisors, recorded 3 weeks before the hearing. He inserted the drive. The screen came to life. The room watched as a grainy Zoom window appeared. Johnson sat in a home office, sleeves rolled up, speaking directly to his team. The audio played without distortion. Make her look ridiculous. Turn Crockett into a clown show. Humiliate her in public so no one else even thinks about standing up next time. Gasps burst across the room. Jurors froze. One audibly whispered, "He said that." A woman in the second row of the gallery covered her mouth. Johnson sat stiff in his chair, silent, pale. His attorney leaned in, whispering, but Johnson didn't blink. The judge glanced at the screen, then at the defendant, then at the jury. The courtroom had seen enough, and for the first time Mike Johnson had no words, no spin, no escape, just silence, and the sound of his own voice playing back against him. 3 days passed. The courtroom lights stayed off, the cameras stayed still, but the country held its breath. Now the moment had arrived. The bailiff entered first. The judge returned to the bench. Jasmine Crockett sat still, hands folded. Mike Johnson sat 2 tables away, silent, no longer flanked by his legal team. His suit looked crisp, but his shoulders didn't. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The forewoman stood. "We have, Your Honor." A pause gripped the courtroom like a hand to the throat. "In the matter of Crockett versus Johnson," the forewoman began, her voice steady but firm, "we, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Johnson, liable for severe personal defamation with intent driven by political motives and implicit bias." The words landed like a gavel to the spine. Audible gasps filled the gallery. Johnson blinked, frozen. Jasmine did not move. The forewoman continued, louder now. "We award compensatory damages in the amount of $25 million for measurable harm to the plaintiff's reputation, safety, and professional standing." Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked. "We further award $75 million in punitive damages due to the defendant's reckless abuse of public platform, systemic power, and intent to intimidate. Total damages, $100 million. A beat of stunned silence, and then the chamber erupted. Applause broke out from the public gallery. The sound was cautious at first, then bold. One juror wiped a tear from her cheek. Another stood as if unable to sit a second longer. The judge slammed the gavel once, not to silence them, but to signal formality. "Order," he said, but his voice carried no anger, just finality. Jasmine Crockett stood, slowly. She didn't raise her fist. She didn't raise her voice. She stepped forward to the microphone, facing the sea of press, court officials, and witnesses. Cameras zoomed in as she spoke her only prepared statement. "They called me too emotional," she said, her voice calm, unwavering. "But emotion is not a crime. When it is protected by truth, it becomes power." She paused, let the silence breathe, then nodded once and stepped back. The quote exploded within minutes. News outlets called it the trial of dignity. CNN's banner read, "100 million defamation verdict, Crockett triumphs in historic case." The New York Times ran a special column that evening titled, "Not Too Emotional, Just Too Powerful." And it wasn't just headlines. That same week, Jasmine announced something few had seen coming. In a press conference held outside her district office in Texas, she stood beside a podium, not in a suit, but in a plain black blouse, holding a framed photo of her late mother. "Part of this award," she said, "will go to create the Gloria Crockett Foundation, a scholarship fund for young girls who are told their voice is too loud, their feelings too much, their dreams too bold." The crowd stood in silence. Some clapped, some cried. And as for Mike Johnson, he didn't show up to Congress the next day, or the day after that. By the end of the week, staffers cleared out his personal office. No press conference, no farewell statement, just silence. Insiders leaked that he had resigned from all leadership duties indefinitely. His name faded from headlines almost as quickly as Jasmine's rose. What once was power was now only echo. A former speaker, brought down not by scandal, not by corruption, but by a sentence, a slur, and the wrong woman to say it to. In the halls of Congress, aides whispered it like myth. In law schools, professors added it to their syllabi. And in communities across the country, people spoke of it not as a lawsuit, but as a message. That dignity matters. That silence isn't weakness. That when someone tries to erase your worth in front of the world, there is a way to rise, not with rage, but with truth. And Jasmine Crockett had done exactly that, on live television, in open court, and in the eyes of millions. As the news spread and Johnson disappeared from public life, what remained wasn't just a courtroom victory, it was a new line in the sand, and the whole country knew it. Legal scholars called it a modern precedent. Civil rights groups called it a landmark reckoning. But to millions watching, it was something deeper. Proof that power, when misused, could finally be held accountable. Not by riots or revolutions, but by process, by facts, by law. Cable panels couldn't stop talking about it. Editorials in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and Time all echoed the same core truth. This case had changed something permanent. In a country where words are flung recklessly from podiums and screens, this verdict drew a bold, undeniable line. Freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence, one law professor said on air. We now have legal confirmation that power behind a microphone has limits. Because after this trial, there was no longer room for pretending that insults were harmless. No more hiding behind the phrase, just words. The courtroom had delivered a message that would ripple through every hallway of power, every talk show set, every campaign stage. This case became the first modern precedent to prove power of speech is not unlimited, and honor, when trampled, can be protected by justice. That sentence was printed in every major outlet. Law students memorized it. Judges began referencing it. In less than a week, the ruling was cited in 4 ongoing defamation cases involving public figures. A legal ripple already turning into a wave. But outside the courts, it hit something even deeper. In barber shops, libraries, classrooms, and living rooms across the country, people talked about it in plain language. About how someone like Jasmine Crockett, a woman, a black congresswoman, someone many had dismissed, didn't just survive a public shaming, she reversed it. She made the most powerful man in the House answer for words he never thought would matter. And she didn't do it with shouting. She didn't do it with revenge. She did it by forcing the system to look at itself and honor what it claimed to protect. Say what you want, one voter told a reporter outside a Houston courthouse. But after this case, nobody in power is going to grab a mic and think they're invincible anymore. Another woman in Baltimore said simply, "For once, dignity won." And that was the legacy, not just the money, not just the headlines, but the moment the country saw that respect could fight back and win. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.